The iPhone X was released in 2017 to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of iPhone and completely reimagined what the iPhone was and how we interacted with our phones. The design of the iPhone X with the notch became synonymous with the iPhones and a design language that Apple still uses today. Hi, my name is Matt, and today I want to take a look at the iPhone X in 2022 and discuss whether or not it's still worth buying. So the iPhone X can be picked up on Amazon Renewed or eBay for between £200 and £250, and I think the answer to whether or not this iPhone is still worth buying isn't so black and white. It's not really a yes or no answer. So for £250 or around those prices, I think it's not really worth buying. I would say that the iPhone X isn't the best bang for your buck. I would really recommend going for the iPhone XR or the iPhone XS. These are two phones that can be bought for almost the exact same price, and I think the iPhone XR actually is cheaper than the iPhone X to buy. However, the iPhone XR and XS came out a year later. They've got improvements to the cameras and a slightly newer processor, meaning that they're likely to receive more software support. With that being said, the iPhone X is still a very usable phone in 2022. So I personally use mine as my work phone, so I still get a lot of use from an iPhone X, and you can pretty much do most things on an iPhone X that you can do on a newer phone. So I would say that the iPhone X really is still a usable phone in 2022. I just don't think it's necessarily worth the 250 quid price tag. So if you can find it for considerably cheaper than you can find an iPhone XS and an iPhone XR, then I say that the iPhone X is still a good buy, and I reckon you're still likely to get 2+ years of software support because it's really not starting to feel very slow yet. So within this video, I'll give you a complete overview of how the iPhone X holds up in 2022 to try and enable you to make an informed decision as to whether or not you want to go ahead and buy one. So starting with the design. The iPhone X has a 5.8-inch OLED display, which is a really good panel. Even after all these years, it still looks fantastic. There's no sign of burn-in, it has fantastic colours, and it's still very viewable even during a bright sunny day. Obviously, at the top of this phone there is the notch, which is the home to the FaceID sensor. My FaceID sensor on this iPhone actually broke, and this seems like quite a common issue that people are experiencing, and it's not a cheap repair. I don't even think it's worth repairing. So from my understanding, the reliability of the FaceID system was improved on the iPhone XS and the XR, so that's another reason why I would recommend going for the XS or the XR over the X. When the FaceID did work, it was very fast and was an effective way of getting into my phone, but it was obviously limited by face masks and sunglasses. The sides of this phone are made of curved stainless steel, and the back is made of glass, which enables wireless charging. And there's also a small camera bump. This camera bump is quite a small camera bump, especially in comparison to some of the newer phones. Ultimately, I don't think the iPhone X is going to be looking outdated anytime soon. It's a really similar design language even to the latest phones, especially when it's in its case. The iPhone X looks great and will continue to look very modern. So moving on to performance. The iPhone X is powered by the A11 chip alongside with 3GB of RAM. Performance on the iPhone X is generally quite good, but I do experience some issues. When navigating through the operating system and opening apps, the iPhone X generally feels really snappy. However, larger apps such as games will start to feel a little bit slower, but they're still playable. Lighter apps are really quick to load, and generally you won't have any issues with the lighter applications. And I've had this phone pretty much since launch, and I have noticed that apps have got slower. So let's say you've got several gigabytes of iMessage conversation history. This can cause the phone to lag when loading up iMessage or texting people. That's just one example of the sort of issues that I faced when I had this phone. Gaming on this phone is certainly doable. I played many hours of PUBG. Whilst it drains the battery really fast and the iPhone X gets quite hot, it's really fun to play games on the iPhone X, and it does work well. I generally think that the performance on this phone is good and responsive, but at times will struggle. In terms of software support, it's really quite difficult to say how many more years of software support this iPhone will receive. I would suggest as a minimum you're likely to get 2 more versions of iOS, but I do genuinely think that 3 or 4 versions of iOS is realistic. However, this doesn't actually guarantee you the latest and greatest features that the new iOS can offer. With iOS 15, the iPhone X did receive a slightly lighter version of iOS that means it's limited in some features, which again I think is another reason to go for the iPhone XS and XR, as they did get the features that the iPhone X was missing out on. So moving on to battery. The battery life on this phone isn't fantastic. It wasn't fantastic when the phone was new, and it's certainly not fantastic when the phone's got a degraded battery. So for me, I can get about 4 hours of screen on time a day with this phone, and that's with kind of lighter use and not gaming. So 4 hours of sort of social media will kill the battery with this phone. I've personally upgraded and only use this phone as a work phone now, so my screen time averages about 20 to 30 minutes a day. And if your screen time's low with an iPhone, you really don't actually have to charge it very often. So depending on your usage, the battery life may suit you well or the battery life may not. So moving on to the camera. I think the camera on the iPhone X is better than most other phones at this price point. So the main camera is 12 megapixels and capable at shooting 4K video at 60 frames per second. The photos come out looking decent. I've got so many memories over the past few years captured with this phone, and it does a really good job. In good lighting, you can get some really good photos. Obviously, they're not as good as the latest iPhone, and in darker lighting, it really does struggle, and there is no night mode. I think generally, this camera is more than capable. In terms of video, this camera is exceptional, especially for a phone that came out in 2017. I kid you not when I say that a BBC show was shot almost entirely on an iPhone X in 2017. So whilst the camera isn't necessarily professional grade, it's still a very powerful camera to have in your pocket. As well, if you've got a gimbal, you can really take some fantastic videos. The front-facing camera isn't amazing for selfies, but it's more than good enough for FaceTime and video calls, etc. So to conclude, whilst I think that the iPhone X is still a very usable phone in 2022, I only think it's worth picking up to buy if you can get a fantastic deal on it. The iPhone XR or the iPhone XS are definitely better buys in 2022, especially since Apple have already started to limit the features that the iPhone X receives. So it's very possible that, yes, it'll get future versions of iOS, but it may be missing out on those top features. Otherwise, if you do want to save a buck and you're looking at the iPhone X, I'd recommend just buying an iPhone 8. The iPhone 8 is almost identical internally to the iPhone X, except it's missing out on 1 GB of RAM. The performance of the iPhone 8 will be very similar to the iPhone X and considerably cheaper. You can pick up an iPhone 8 for about £100 nowadays. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope this video was helpful.